Hello and welcome to our next lesson. Today we'll be looking at the next lesson in Chapter 9. And we'll first start off by discussing evaluating causal arguments. So a causal argument must have true premises and proper form. In other words, it must pass both tests, as we should expect, the true premises test and the proper form test. So next, let's discuss some logical fallacies that are common with causal arguments. The first one is called the hasty cause fallacy, and this is when someone moves too hastily from the premise that E1 and E2 are correlated to the conclusion that E1 causes E2 without having eliminated other possible explanations of the correlation. Remember the various other possible explanations of the correlation. It could be the case that E2 causes E1, or perhaps maybe there's a third cause, right? That's an underlying cause that causes both E1 and E2. Could be the case that it's just merely a coincidental correlation as well. To give you an example here, there's a correlation with my having a stomachache and drinking beer. So someone might think from this correlation that drinking beer causes me to have a stomachache. However, it's the rotten pretzels that really are the cause of the stomachache. So it could be the case that I like to eat pretzels, and the pretzels make me want to drink beer, and they also cause me a stomachache because the rotten pretzels have mold on them or are old, too old. So really it's the rotten pretzels that are causing both. They cause me to drink beer and they cause me to have a stomachache. And really, the beer doesn't cause me to have a stomachache, and vice versa, the stomachache doesn't cause me to drink beer. So there's really no causation going on between E1 and E2, but there is a third event, an E3, namely eating the pretzels, that is doing the underlying work. And here, as a side note, it's important here to note that if there's no correlation, there cannot be causation. So if you're trying to establish a causal claim, such as in the sciences or what have you, it better be the case that of the two things that are two events in your causal claim, that they're both correlated. Okay, so the next fallacy is the slippery slope fallacy. And the slippery slope fallacy is committed when one makes a series of causal claims, one or more of which commit the fallacy of hasty cause, or one or more of which does not properly establish causation. So what's going on here is that, well, the slippery slope fallacy could contain the hasty cause fallacy, because one might be committing this fallacy in the slippery slope, or it could be the case that one just doesn't establish proper causation in this chain of events. So the idea behind a slippery slope argument is that you say that, well, if we allow one thing to happen, then this next thing will happen, and then this next thing will happen, and so on and so forth. In other words, if we allow one thing to happen, we'll start slipping down a slope, where we'll fall down a slope into a state of affairs that's at the bottom of the slope, that's very negative and very bad. Here's an example of a slippery slope argument. If we allow abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy, then who's to stop abortions from being allowed in the second trimester, and then the third? As another example, if you start smoking weed, then you'll get into cocaine, then you'll get into heroin, then you'll get into crystal meth. So I'm sure you've heard these kinds of arguments before, where they say that, if we allow one thing to happen, then this will lead to a slippery slope, where we'll slip down the slope into a very bad state of affairs. However, this is a fallacy if each chain in the causal chain is not adequately supported, and if not the right kinds of evidence are there to back up those moves from chain to chain, from cause and effect to the next effect and to the next effect. If there is not proper argumentation showing that this is likely to happen, then there is a problem with the argument, right? Because in the end, the slippery slope argument is providing a series of causal claims that are a series of causal conclusions. So those need to be properly justified. So if you notice in the examples given, those arguments all by themselves commit the slippery slope fallacy. In order to not commit the slippery slope fallacy in those two below arguments, one would have to provide justified evidence, right, to back up each step in the causal sequence of events. Okay, so next let's discuss the post hoc fallacy. And this occurs when someone misunderstands the relationship between causation and time. Just because E1 happens before E2 doesn't necessarily mean that E1 causes E2. So this can be a mistake, right? Just because one event occurs before a second event, you cannot therefore conclude from that that E1 causes E2. For example, day comes before night, but you cannot say that the daytime causes nighttime to occur. Rather, what causes nighttime to occur has to deal with various complex issues such as the rotation of the Earth around the Sun and the spinning of the Earth on its axis. All right, next, fall comes before winter. Just because fall comes before winter, it doesn't follow that fall causes winter to happen. Once again, that is based on some kind of complex story in astronomy, right, as far as why fall comes before winter. Just because fall comes before the season of winter, it doesn't follow that fall causes winter to occur. And there is a kind of incestuous nature of this post hoc fallacy with the hasty cause fallacy, because the post hoc fallacy, it does focus on two events where one precedes the other in time. However, insofar as one precedes the other in time, in certain cases, those can also be described as being correlated with each other. And in the proper kind of example, there would be a fallacy because you cannot draw a causal claim merely from correlation. So, you could have a case where it's both commits the post hoc fallacy and the hasty cause fallacy. For example, when I turn up my thermostat, my heat then comes on in my house. So that can be described as in a time period where first I turn on the heat, up the heat on my thermostat, and then second, what happens is my heat comes on. Okay, so there's that, and that is very strongly kind of indicating the post hoc fallacy. But that series of events could also be described as saying, well, there's a correlation between turning up the thermostat and heat coming out of the ventilators. That can be described merely as a kind of correlation without necessarily giving a time sequence of which one came before the other. So at times, an argument that commits the post hoc fallacy, it could very easily be worded into being one of correlation of the relevant events, in which it could also be described as being the hasty cause fallacy. So sometimes kind of there's this kind of incestuous nature between the post hoc fallacy and the hasty cause fallacy that can occur in many cases. Okay, I believe we've already looked at that slide. Let's look at the common cause fallacy. The common cause fallacy occurs when one fails to consider the possibility of a third cause, or in other words, a common cause, that underlies E1 and E2. So in this situation, what we have is a causal claim made about two series of events. Let's say it's E1 and E2, but one commits the common cause fallacy because one fails to take into consideration the possibility of a third underlying cause, an E3. So we've already discussed this in detail before, right? There can be an E3 that really is what causes E1 and E2 to occur. And this as well can have an incestuous relationship with the hasty cause fallacy, because the hasty cause fallacy occurs when there's only correlation is stated. However, it could be the case that the conclusion does not follow that, let's say, E1 causes E2 because there could be a E3 that was not taken into consideration. That's part of the hasty cause fallacy. And as we can see here, that is also the common cause fallacy. So you can think of the common cause fallacy as being a more specified, precise version or a subset of the hasty cause fallacy. Okay, so let's look at some problems here about which fallacy is at play, and it could be the case that there are several fallacies in play. So looking at number 1, the vast majority of people who get small cell lung cancer are or were cigarette smokers. What fallacy is at play here? So this is not a slippery slope fallacy. A slippery slope fallacy gives a kind of sequence of a chain of events, of several causal events that occur. If you allow one thing to happen, then this is going to happen, then that is going to happen, so on and so forth. That's not what's going on here. What we see here is that this could be read as being one of correlation. There's a correlation between a vast majority of people who get small cell lung cancer and who were cigarette smokers. So in order to try to make a causal claim here, which is kind of implicit within this argument, or a kind of unstated conclusion, is that cigarette smoking causes small cell lung cancer. Well, this is a hasty cause fallacy, right? Because much more needs to be done to establish the causal conclusion that smoking causes lung cancer. All that's been established here is merely correlation. The post hoc fallacy also can come into play here. This could be read as saying something along a time scale, that people smoke cigarettes first and then they develop cancer. So since smoking comes before development of cancer, cigarette smoking causes cancer. So more would need to be shown, more evidence would need to be provided to show that that kind of causal chain of events is actually correct. So this is also the post hoc fallacy. And the common cause fallacy also comes into play here. There could be an underlying third cause or third event that causes both small cell lung cancer and cigarette smoking to occur. So that possibility should be addressed and eliminated. Let's look at the second one. If we allow public transportation to run till 2 a.m., then this will promote more boozing and partying in the wee hours of the night, and then our town will be a sin city. So this is very much a slippery slope fallacy in this case. We have a sequence of causal chain of events. If we allow one thing to happen, then all these other things are eventually going to happen down this causal chain of events. And really no evidence is given to support each move down this causal chain to show that these kinds of causal inferences are warranted or justified or have enough evidence or are more likely to occur than not. Let's look at the third. My dog scratched my leg. Later that night, I got a fever. My dog must have given me something. So this is very much making an indication about time. My dog scratched my leg. Later, I got a fever. So then there's an inference, well, since one happened before the other, what happened first must have caused what happened later. Right? My dog must have given me something. So this would require further evidence, right, to show that there actually is causation. You cannot draw this kind of conclusion merely based on the fact that one precedes the other in time. So this is the post hoc fallacy. This could also be read as saying that there's a correlation between my dog scratching me and me getting a fever. So therefore, my dog scratching me caused me to get the fever. So the hasty cause fallacy also comes into play here. And there also could be perhaps a common cause in this problem as well. That would at least need to be addressed, that there is a possible underlying third event that is doing all of the causal work here. Number 4, the tribe did a rain dance because of the drought. Rain ensued, so the dance must have worked. Once again here we have a time sequence of events. Tribe did a rain dance, then rain ensued, it followed. And that's it. There's no further evidence given. It's the causal claim, the conclusion that the dance must have caused the rain, that is only justified based on this time sequence of events, but that is fallacious. This is a post hoc fallacy. Once again, the hasty cause fallacy can come into play here. One can read this as saying that doing a rain dance and there being rain are correlated. So since they're correlated, therefore the rain dance causes the drought. However, much more work needs to be done in order to establish causation. So this also commits the hasty cause fallacy. Next, there's a co-occurrence of the feeling of excitement in me and watching this movie. I bet the feeling of excitement has influenced me to watch this movie. So in this example, what we have here is a statement of co-occurrence. In other words, they're correlated. Notice here there is no explicit mention of time, that one precedes the other. So the post hoc fallacy does not come into play here, but it says that there's a correlation between the feeling of excitement in me and watching this movie. I bet the feeling of excitement has influenced me to watch this movie. Right? So all there is in the premise is correlation. So just from correlation alone, you cannot generate a causal conclusion. Right? Much more work needs to be done. So this is the hasty cause fallacy. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, and I will see you for the next.